Sister threw a cake at me for not giving her my apartment. The look when I showed my net worth. "You're so selfish," my sister screamed as chocolate frosting dripped down my face. The birthday cake she had just hurled at me lay scattered across my hardwood floors, the same floors she desperately wanted to call her own. What she didn't know was that while she was busy throwing tantrums, I had quietly built a 7-figure investment portfolio. The apartment she coveted? Just a tiny fraction of what I actually owned. The look on her face when I finally revealed my net worth? That was worth every crumb of cake in my hair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The cake incident happened on my 32nd birthday, but to understand how we got there, we need to go back to where it all began. I'm Olivia Chen, and for most of my life, I've been living in my sister Rebecca's shadow. Growing up in Portland, Rebecca was everything I wasn't: extroverted, naturally athletic, and effortlessly popular. She was homecoming queen, captain of the volleyball team, and student body president. When people learned I was Rebecca Chen's sister, their faces would always register the same slight disappointment. Next to her, I was practically invisible, quiet, studious, and perpetually awkward in social situations. "Why can't you put yourself out there more?" our mother would ask with a sigh. "Look at your sister. Everyone loves her." What they didn't see was how I processed the world differently. While Rebecca collected friends and accolades, I collected information and ideas. Where she saw social opportunities, I saw patterns and systems. Her world was people. Mine was possibilities. Our divergent paths continued after high school. Rebecca went to UCLA on a volleyball scholarship, majoring in communications and becoming the social center of her sorority. I chose the University of Washington, double majoring in computer science and finance, a combination that raised eyebrows, but made perfect sense to me. The digital and financial worlds were converging, and I wanted to position myself at that intersection. College was transformative for me. Away from Rebecca's overshadowing presence, I discovered my own strengths. I wasn't just good at math. I had an intuitive understanding of complex systems and a talent for identifying inefficiencies. My professors noticed. My internship supervisors noticed. For the first time, I wasn't being compared to my sister, and I thrived. After graduation, Rebecca landed a job in public relations at a trendy media company in San Francisco. Her Instagram quickly filled with photos at exclusive events, surrounded by influential people, her signature dazzling smile never dimming. Meanwhile, I accepted a junior analyst position at Meridian Financial in Seattle, a mid-sized investment firm with a growing technology focus. My starting salary was modest, $58,000 a year, which barely covered my expenses in the increasingly expensive city. I found a tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill, a lively neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. The 450-square-foot space cost more than I wanted to pay, but the location was perfect, within walking distance of both my job and the vibrant local tech community. "You're paying how much for a glorified closet?" Rebecca laughed during one of our monthly phone calls. "God, Liv, you should see my place in the marina. Floor-to-ceiling windows, rooftop pool, doorman. The company practically pays for it." I didn't bother explaining that my choice was strategic. My apartment's small size and minimal amenities didn't matter to me. What mattered was its proximity to opportunities. During my first 2 years at Meridian, I made myself indispensable by developing analytical models that quantified risk factors our competitors were overlooking. I wasn't particularly assertive in meetings, but my work spoke for itself. When the senior analyst on our tech investment team left unexpectedly, I was the obvious choice to fill the gap. "You're not exactly leadership material," my manager, David, told me during my promotion discussion, "but your analytical skills are exceptional. Just keep doing what you're doing." His assessment stung, but I recognized the opportunity it presented. If my colleagues and superiors saw me as a reliable background player rather than a threat, I could operate with minimal scrutiny while building expertise that would eventually become my leverage. My promotion came with a significant salary increase to $85,000, allowing me a bit more breathing room. Rather than upgrading my lifestyle, however, I made a decision that would shape my future. I would live as though I still earned my previous salary and invest the difference. This wasn't a random choice. During my time at Meridian, I had noticed a pattern in the portfolios I analyzed. The most successful private investors weren't necessarily those with the highest incomes, but those who systematically allocated capital toward undervalued opportunities and maintained strict discipline during market volatility. I opened a separate investment account and established automatic transfers of $500 each month, the approximate difference between my new and old take-home pay. My investment strategy was methodical, focusing on emerging technology companies I understood through my professional work, and dividend-paying stocks that would create compounding passive income. While my colleagues spent their bonuses on luxury, vacations, or designer wardrobes, I channeled mine directly into investments. This wasn't deprivation to me. It was calculated deferral of gratification. Each dollar invested was buying my future freedom. 3 years into my career, an opportunity arose that would accelerate my financial trajectory. Meridian was expanding. Its advisory services for high-net-worth tech entrepreneurs, a group with unique investment needs given their concentrated equity positions and unusual liquidity patterns. Having built models specifically for technology valuation, I was assigned to assist the team developing these specialized services. This role gave me unprecedented access to the financial habits and strategies of self-made tech millionaires. I observed patterns that weren't discussed in any finance textbook: how they structured their holdings, leveraged private investments, and optimized tax positions. Each client file was a masterclass in wealth creation. "You've got a knack for understanding these tech clients," noted Elaine Kim, the director of the high net worth division. "They appreciate that you speak their language." What Elaine didn't fully recognize was how carefully I was studying not just their financial positions, but their entire wealth-building frameworks. While my official job was analyzing their investments, my unofficial education was in their wealth mindset. The systematic way they approached capital allocation, risk, and opportunity. By my 4th year at Meridian, my salary had increased to $110,000, and my investment account had grown to just over $175,000 through a combination of my contributions and market appreciation. While most of my peers were celebrating minor promotions with expensive restaurant meals, I was quietly building a portfolio that would eventually render traditional employment optional. My personal life was similarly focused. I maintained a small circle of close friends, most of whom worked in technology or finance, and our gatherings typically involved discussions of emerging trends, market opportunities, and innovative business models. Dating was occasional and strategic. I had no interest in partners who might divert my focus from my long-term objectives. Rebecca, meanwhile, had transitioned from PR to influencer marketing, leveraging her substantial social media, following and industry connections. Her income fluctuated with endorsement deals and marketing campaigns, but her lifestyle remained consistently lavish. She had moved to Los Angeles, where her apartment in West Hollywood served as both home and content creation studio. Our conversations had grown increasingly infrequent and superficial. Rebecca shared highlights from industry parties and celebrity encounters. I offered sanitized updates about Seattle weather and generic work projects. The details of my investment strategy and growing portfolio remained entirely private, not just from Rebecca, but from everyone in my life. This privacy wasn't about secrecy for its own sake, but about maintaining optimal conditions for wealth accumulation. I had observed that people who publicly discussed financial success often faced social complications that distracted from their objectives. Expectations of generosity, requests for advice or loans, and shifting relationship dynamics. 5 years into my career, two significant events occurred nearly simultaneously. First, the tech company whose stock comprised the largest position in my portfolio was acquired at a substantial premium, instantly doubling the value of that holding. Second, my landlord informed me that my apartment building was being converted to condominiums, and existing tenants would have the first opportunity to purchase their units. The acquisition windfall increased my portfolio to just over $400,000. The condominium conversion presented an interesting opportunity. My unit was being offered at $295,000, below market value as an incentive for current tenants. After careful analysis of Seattle's real estate trends, particularly in tech-centric neighborhoods, I determined that purchasing made strategic sense. I approached the transaction methodically. Rather than liquidating investments to fund the purchase, I secured a mortgage with a 20% down payment, maintaining maximum capital in my higher-yielding investment portfolio. The property would serve dual purposes, providing stable housing while adding a real estate component to my asset allocation. The day I closed on the apartment, I allowed myself a small celebration, a good bottle of wine and dinner from my favorite local restaurant. It wasn't extravagant, but it marked a meaningful milestone. At 28, I had a diversified investment portfolio and owned real estate in an appreciating market. More importantly, I had created these assets while remaining completely beneath the radar, perceived by colleagues as a competent but unexceptional analyst, and by family as the less successful sister. This perception gap was most evident during our family's annual holiday gathering in Portland that year. As we sat around our parents' dining table, Rebecca dominated the conversation with stories about her recent influencer trip to Bali, complete with drone footage of her paddleboarding at sunrise. "The resort comped the whole thing," she explained, scrolling through professionally edited photos on her phone. 5 nights in an overwater bungalow, all because I posted a few stories. Sometimes I can't believe this is actually my job. When attention reluctantly shifted to me, I offered my usual bland update. "Seattle's keeping me busy. Work is going well, and I'm getting settled in my apartment." The condominium purchase went unmentioned. The investment portfolio remained invisible. "You should really think about coming to LA," Rebecca suggested, not unkindly. "I know people at some great firms. Finance people are making good money in the entertainment industry, and you'd have an actual social life." Our mother nodded enthusiastically. "That would be wonderful. You two could be close again, like when you were little." I smiled non-committally, allowing them to maintain their perception of me as the sister who needed help, who would benefit from Rebecca's connections and social guidance. The truth, that my net worth was likely already higher than Rebecca's despite her lavish lifestyle, remained my private knowledge. The following 3 years brought steady progress. My role at Meridian expanded to include direct client relationship management, increasing my salary to $145,000 plus performance bonuses. My investment portfolio, bolstered by consistent contributions and strategic allocation, grew to approximately $850,000. My condominium, benefiting from Seattle's technology boom, had appreciated to an estimated value of $425,000. Then came the pandemic. As global markets initially plummeted, I did what most retail investors couldn't, maintained absolute discipline, leveraging the volatility to acquire quality assets at distressed prices. When tech stocks surged during the extended lockdowns, my carefully positioned portfolio captured exceptional gains. Rebecca's experience was markedly different. The influencer marketing industry faced significant disruption as travel ceased and event-based content became impossible to produce. Her income dropped precipitously, while her expenses remained structured around her pre-pandemic lifestyle. Our phone conversations, previously infrequent, now became regular as Rebecca sought both emotional support and practical advice. The first time in our adult lives, she seemed to genuinely value my perspective, particularly my financial pragmatism, which had suddenly become relevant in a world of uncertainty. "I don't understand how everything fell apart so quickly," she confessed during one late-night call. "3 canceled campaigns, and suddenly I can barely make rent. How do people live like this?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I offered practical suggestions, expense reduction strategies, negotiation approaches for her lease, potential pandemic-resistant income streams. What I didn't share was how differently I had positioned myself for precisely this type of systemic shock. By early 2021, as the world began its tentative reopening, my portfolio had surpassed $1.2 million, crossing the threshold I had mentally classified as initial financial independence. Based on conservative withdrawal principles, this sum could generate approximately $48,000 annually in perpetuity, roughly equivalent to my first salary at Meridian, which I had already proven I could live on comfortably. This milestone didn't prompt any external changes. I continued my role at Meridian, now as a senior investment strategist with enhanced client responsibilities. I maintained my modest lifestyle in my appreciating condominium. Most importantly, I preserved the privacy of my financial position, understanding that true independence required not just capital but strategic anonymity. As the pandemic's acute phase subsided, Rebecca's career began to recover, though not to its previous heights. The influencer market had become more saturated, and her extended absence had damaged her positioning algorithms. She adapted by pivoting toward more sustainable content creation, lifestyle advice, home organization, and wellness routines that didn't require constant travel or events. During one of our video calls, I noticed she seemed distracted, her eyes frequently darting to something off camera. Finally, she sighed dramatically. "I've been putting off telling you this, but I'm looking at apartments in Seattle." The statement caught me by surprise. "Seattle? What about your LA network?" "LA is oversaturated, and the competition is brutal," she explained. "Seattle has a growing creative scene, but fewer established influencers. Plus, living costs are lower than LA. I could restart there, build a new audience based around Pacific Northwest lifestyle content." I nodded, processing the implications of having Rebecca in close proximity after years of comfortable distance. "That makes sense from a business perspective. Have you found any promising places?" "Everything is so expensive on a single income," she complained. "I've been looking at Capitol Hill, actually. Isn't that where you are? Maybe we could be neighbors." "It's a great neighborhood," I acknowledged cautiously. "Very different from West Hollywood, though." "That's part of the appeal. New content opportunities. Plus," she added with a familiar persuasive smile, "having my big sister nearby would make the transition easier." Over the following weeks, Rebecca's Seattle plans solidified. She scheduled viewings at several apartments in my building and the surrounding blocks, reasoning that proximity to my place would be convenient while she established herself in the new city. Each option she considered was significantly more expensive than my mortgage payment, reflecting both the market's appreciation since my purchase and her prioritization of aesthetic features suitable for content creation. "Everything I can afford is so small," she lamented during another call. "How am I supposed to film in a space where I can touch both walls at once?" I offered practical suggestions, creative camera angles, utilizing public spaces for content, focusing on quality over square footage. Each recommendation was met with increasing frustration. "You don't understand," she insisted. "My apartment isn't just where I live, it's my primary set. It's literally my business." 2 days later, Rebecca called with unexpected excitement. "I found it. The perfect place. Corner unit, great light, open concept, just enough character to be interesting. On camera. Guess where?" "Where?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Your building, 2 floors up from you. Isn't that perfect? We'll be so close, but I'll still have my independence. The rent she quoted was nearly double my mortgage payment for an identical floor plan. The Seattle market had indeed appreciated significantly, but Rebecca's enthusiasm seemed disproportionate to the financial burden this would represent given her uncertain income. That's exciting, I said carefully. The application process can be competitive, though. Have you been approved? Her enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Not yet. They're concerned about income stability given my self-employment and the pandemic disruption. I might need a cosigner. The request remained unspoken but hung in the air between us. I changed the subject, suggesting alternatives she might consider in more affordable neighborhoods. Rebecca listened with thinly veiled impatience before steering the conversation back to the apartment in my building. A week later, she called again, her voice tight with controlled frustration. They rejected my application. Apparently, my income is too unpredictable, whatever that means. I can't believe this is happening. I offered genuine sympathy. The rental market had become increasingly rigid about income verification, particularly for self-employed applicants without substantial cash reserves. Rebecca had always prioritized visible prosperity over financial security, a strategy that worked well in boom times but created vulnerability during disruptions. There are other options, I suggested. Maybe something slightly further from downtown, or a smaller unit to start with until you're established here. I've been thinking, Rebecca interrupted, her tone shifting to one I recognized from childhood, the voice she used when asking for something significant. Your place is really bigger than you need, isn't it? I mean, you're just one person, and you're barely there with your work schedule. I remained silent, allowing her to continue down this path. What if I moved in with you, just temporarily, until I find the perfect place and get my Seattle content established? 6 months max. I'd contribute to expenses, of course. The proposal was presented as mutually beneficial. She would have stable housing in her target neighborhood, and I would have company and shared expenses. What remained unacknowledged was how fundamentally incompatible our lifestyles had become. My apartment was organized around efficiency and functionality. Rebecca's existence was curated for performative documentation. I don't think that would work well for either of us, I said gently. We have very different living styles. What does that mean? Her tone sharpened. You think I'm too messy or something? Not messy. Just different priorities. My place is set up for my specific needs. It's not suitable for content creation. What followed was a progressively tense conversation where Rebecca cycled through multiple approaches: nostalgia about sisterly bonding, financial pragmatism about shared expenses, emotional appeals about family support during transitions. When these tactics failed to sway me, her frustration became increasingly evident. I don't understand why you're being so selfish, she finally stated. You have this whole apartment to yourself. You work all the time anyway. Why can't you help me? Just this once? It's not about helping, I explained. It's about maintaining boundaries that work for both of us. Living together would create unnecessary tension. Boundaries, she repeated with unmistakable derision. You always were closed off. God forbid anyone get too close to perfect, controlled Olivia. The conversation ended poorly, with Rebecca abruptly disconnecting after declaring she would figure it out herself, since she obviously couldn't count on family. I felt the familiar mixture of guilt and frustration that had characterized many of our interactions since childhood, but remained confident in my decision. 3 days later, Rebecca called again, her voice suspiciously cheerful. I found a solution. My friend Jasmine is relocating to Chicago and needs someone to take over her lease. Guess where her apartment is? The building she named was in Belltown, a neighborhood adjacent to mine with similar demographics and amenities. The coincidence seemed improbable. That's convenient timing, I noted cautiously. Isn't it? The universe provides, Rebecca laughed. Anyway, I'm flying up next week to sign the paperwork and measure the space. I thought maybe we could celebrate with dinner at your place. My treat. I'll bring everything, you won't have to do a thing. The sudden resolution and Rebecca's effusive goodwill triggered my skepticism, but I agreed to the dinner. If nothing else, it would help repair our strained relationship before she moved to Seattle permanently. The significance of the date didn't register until I marked it in my calendar. April 16th, my 32nd birthday. Rebecca hadn't mentioned this, presenting the dinner as celebration of her housing solution rather than my birthday. This wasn't entirely surprising. While I reliably remembered and acknowledged her birthdays, she had occasionally forgotten mine over the years. When she arrived at my apartment the following week, Rebecca was carrying several shopping bags and a rectangular bakery box. "I brought everything," she announced, sweeping past me into the kitchen. "Wine, cheese plate, that pasta you like from the Italian place down the street, and chocolate cake for dessert." The evening began pleasantly enough. Rebecca was animated, describing her content plans for Seattle and how she would leverage the city's aesthetic for her rebranding. The apartment she was taking over apparently had excellent natural light and authentic architectural details that would photograph well. "It's actually perfect for my needs," she enthused. "The layout is much better for filming than I initially realized. Everything happens for a reason, right?" As we finished the main course, Rebecca refilled our wine glasses and studied me with unusual intensity. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, about boundaries and different priorities." "I'm glad the housing situation worked out," I offered, sensing a shift in her demeanor. "It did, but it got me thinking about something." "Us." She leaned forward slightly. "Liv, we never talk about your finances." The abrupt topic change triggered internal alarms, but I maintained a neutral expression. "Not much to discuss. Pretty standard analyst compensation." Rebecca shook her head. "See, that's what doesn't add up. You've been at Meridian for what, 7 years? Working with wealthy clients? Yet you live in this modest apartment, drive where? A 5-year-old car, and never seem to take vacations. Where does all your money go?" The directness of the question was surprising, but I had prepared for such inquiries throughout my career. "I save a reasonable portion. Financial stability is important to me." "Stability," she repeated, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "That's very you. But I'm not talking about an emergency fund. I'm talking about the fact that you must have significant investments by now." I shrugged non-committally. "I make appropriate provisions for my future." Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. "Here's what I think. I think you're actually doing very well financially. I think that's why you won't help me with the apartment situation, not because of boundaries, but because you're secretly selfish." "That's unfair," I replied calmly. "My decision about the apartment was about compatible living arrangements, not finances." "Is it?" She set her glass down with deliberate precision. "Then explain something to me. This building has a public record of sales. Your condominium purchase price is listed, which means you somehow had enough for a down payment 5 years ago when you were still in a junior position." I hadn't anticipated this level of research. Rebecca had never shown interest in financial matters beyond her immediate needs. "I saved aggressively," I stated simply, "and received a favorable first-time buyer rate." "Right." Rebecca's tone grew increasingly sarcastic. "Just saved aggressively. Meanwhile, I've been struggling to rebuild after the pandemic, and you couldn't even temporarily share your space. Rebecca, these are separate issues. Are they?" She stood abruptly, moving to retrieve the cake box from the counter. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my sister has been hoarding resources while watching me struggle." She placed the cake on the table between us. "Happy birthday, by the way. I didn't forget." The acknowledgement, delivered with such evident resentment, created a palpable tension. I recognized that the evening had been orchestrated not as reconciliation, but confrontation. "Thank you for remembering," I said quietly. Should we have some cake? You know what? I don't think I want cake anymore. Rebecca's voice had taken on the brittle quality that preceded her rare but spectacular emotional outbursts. I want honesty. For once in your perfect, controlled life, I want you to admit that you've been secretly doing great while watching me struggle. That's not true, I countered, maintaining composure despite the escalating tension. I've offered advice and support whenever you've asked. Advice? She laughed harshly. Basic budgeting tips while you're probably sitting on a small fortune. God, you must think I'm such an idiot. I've never thought that, I assured her. I've always admired your creativity and social intelligence. Stop being so condescending. Rebecca's voice rose sharply. Just admit it. You have money, real money, and you've been hiding it from everyone while playing the humble analyst. The moment had arrived more dramatically than I had anticipated, but perhaps it was inevitable. The carefully maintained perception gap between my financial reality and external appearance had finally become unsustainable, at least with Rebecca. You're right that I've been financially successful, I acknowledged, choosing my words carefully. I've made solid investment decisions and been disciplined about saving. How successful? She demanded. Ballpark it for me. I hesitated, calculating the risks of disclosure against the damage of continued evasion. Successful enough that financial security isn't a concern. Numbers, Olivia. After all these years of secrecy, you owe me that much. I don't think specific numbers would be helpful to our conversation, I replied, already recognizing from her expression that this response was inadequate. Unbelievable, Rebecca whispered, shaking her head slowly. Then, with a sudden movement that I had no time to anticipate, she grabbed the chocolate cake with both hands and hurled it directly at me. The cake hit my chest and face, splattering, chocolate frosting across my sweater and hair before falling to the floor in chunks. The shock of the impact momentarily stunned me into silence. You're so selfish, Rebecca shouted, tears now streaming down her face. You've had everything handed to you, the stable job, the practical mind that everyone values. Do you have any idea how hard I've had to work to create my career from nothing? How many times I've had to reinvent myself while you've been quietly accumulating wealth? I reached for a napkin, wiping frosting from my eyes. Rebecca, this is completely inappropriate. Inappropriate? She was nearly screaming now. You know what's inappropriate? Watching your sister struggle financially while you sit on a pile of money and refuse to even temporarily share your precious space. All because of boundaries and different living styles. Just admit it's because you think you're better than me. The accusation, so fundamentally disconnected from my actual motivations, finally pierced my practiced composure. Years of calculated restraint, of strategic understatement, and deliberate invisibility suddenly felt not like wisdom, but unnecessary limitation. Without speaking, I walked to my home office, returning moments later with my laptop. Still covered in chocolate frosting, I opened the computer and navigated to my main investment dashboard, the comprehensive view of my portfolio I had never shared with anyone. You want numbers? I turned the screen toward her. Here are numbers. Rebecca's eyes widened as she processed the information displayed. The dashboard showed my complete financial position. The investment portfolio now valued at just over $1. $6 million, the condominium with approximately $275,000 in equity, and additional specialized investments bringing my total net worth to approximately $95 million. Her expression transformed from anger to disbelief to something more complex, a mixture of shock, validation, and unmistakable envy. This isn't possible, she whispered. How could you possibly have this much money? 7 years of disciplined investing, I explained quietly. Consistent contributions from my salary, strategic allocation to growth-oriented assets, compound returns. It's not magic. It's mathematics and patience. Rebecca stared at the screen, then back at me, chocolate frosting still dripping from my hair onto the hardwood floor. The absurdity of the moment, the physical comedy of my appearance contrasted with the serious financial revelation, suddenly struck me, and I began to laugh. After a moment of continued shock, Rebecca's expression cracked, and she joined me in reluctant laughter that quickly became uncontrollable. For several minutes, we both surrendered to the ridiculous tableau we had created. Me covered in cake, her mascara streaked from tears, both of us laughing until we struggled to breathe. When our laughter finally subsided, something had fundamentally shifted between us. The careful facade I had maintained for years had been literally smashed by chocolate cake, revealing not just my financial position, but a deeper truth about our relationship. "I can't believe you've been doing this all along," Rebecca finally said, her voice quieter now. "Why did you keep it secret? Especially from me?" The question deserved an honest answer. Partly because financial privacy has strategic advantages. Mostly because I needed to build this independently, on my own terms, without explanation or justification. But why not help me when I needed it? The question contained genuine hurt beneath the residual frustration. "Because giving you money wouldn't actually help you," I replied gently. "What would help is teaching you how to create sustainable financial independence." The apartment situation wasn't about the space. It was about continuing patterns where I accommodate your needs at the expense of my boundaries. Rebecca was silent for a long moment, absorbing this perspective. Finally, she sighed deeply. "I should probably help you clean up this mess." As we wiped chocolate frosting from my floors and furniture, something unexpected happened. We began to have the most honest conversation of our adult lives. I explained my financial strategy in detail, including the psychological components that had allowed me to maintain discipline through market volatility. Rebecca shared her genuine struggles with financial management and her anxiety about diminishing relevance in a saturated influencer market. By the time the apartment was clean, we had established a new foundation for our relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than outdated childhood dynamics. The perception gap had closed, allowing us to interact as equals with different strengths rather than as the successful sister and the struggling one. "I still need a place to stay until the Belltown apartment is ready next month," Rebecca said as she prepared to leave. "Any chance you could recommend a good short-term rental? That won't destroy my budget?" I considered the request and recognized the opportunity it presented. Not for continued accommodation of unhealthy patterns, but for demonstrating a new, more balanced form of support. "I have a better idea," I replied. "Let me teach you how to evaluate which short-term options actually align with your financial goals. We'll find you something that works for your content needs without compromising your financial future." Rebecca smiled, a genuine smile without the performative quality that had characterized so many of our interactions. "I'd like that, and maybe you could teach me some of what you know about investing? Not the whole mysterious empire-building thing, just the basics." As I closed the door behind her, I realized that the evening's dramatic confrontation had accomplished what years of careful avoidance had not. It had created conditions for authentic connection based on reality rather than perception. The chocolate cake incident, messy and emotional as it was, had cleared away pretenses on both sides. More importantly, it had freed me from the limitations of strategic invisibility. After years of building wealth in the shadows, I could now leverage my financial knowledge more openly, potentially creating impact beyond my personal portfolio. The very assets I had accumulated through disciplined privacy could now generate different forms of value through strategic visibility. The chocolate frosting in my hair was a small price to pay for that transformation. The morning after what I now thought of as the cake incident, I awoke to a text from Rebecca. "Still can't believe last night happened. Sorry about your floor, and your sweater, and your hair. Coffee soon?" I smiled at the message, its tone markedly different from our previous communications. The confrontation had cleared the air in ways I hadn't anticipated, creating space for a relationship based on reality rather than the carefully maintained illusions we had both constructed. As I prepared for work, I found myself contemplating the implications of my involuntary financial disclosure. For years, I had operated according to a clear strategic principle. Financial anonymity creates optionality. By keeping my growing wealth private, I had avoided the social complications that often accompany visible success: expectations of assistance, shifts in relationship dynamics, unsolicited requests for advice or investment. Now that Rebecca knew, containing that information would be challenging. She had never been particularly discreet, and the revelation was precisely the kind of dramatic narrative she typically shared with friends, or, potentially, her social media audience. This new reality required strategic reassessment. If maintaining complete privacy was no longer viable, how could I shape the narrative to advance rather than undermine my long-term objectives? I arrived at Meridian's offices earlier than usual, using the quiet morning hours to review my current position across multiple dimensions: financial, professional, and personal. My investment portfolio continued to perform exceptionally well, with particular strength in my technology holdings. My role at Meridian had evolved to include leadership of specialized investment strategies for technology entrepreneurs, a position that provided both substantial compensation and valuable insight into emerging opportunities. What had changed was not my foundational situation, but the context surrounding it. If information about my financial position began circulating, how would that affect my carefully constructed professional persona? Would colleagues who had previously viewed me as a competent but unassuming analyst suddenly see me as competition, or worse, as someone who had deliberately misrepresented herself? By mid-morning, my contemplation was interrupted by an unexpected meeting request from Elaine Kim, now the executive director of Private Client Services. The calendar invitation offered no agenda, merely noting strategic discussion as the topic. When I entered Elaine's corner office at the appointed time, I found her reviewing documents with unusual intensity. She glanced up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Olivia, thank you for making time. Please, have a seat." I settled into the chair across from her desk, maintaining a neutral expression despite my internal curiosity about the meeting's purpose. "I've been reviewing our client allocation models," Elaine began, "particularly for the technology entrepreneur segment. Your work in this area has been exceptional." "Thank you," I replied. "It's a demographic I understand well." Elaine nodded. Thoughtfully. "That's precisely what I wanted to discuss. Your insights into their investment psychology have created significant value for Meridian. The frameworks you've developed for evaluating early-stage private investments have outperformed traditional models by substantial margins." Though her words were complimentary, something in Elaine's tone suggested this wasn't merely a performance review. "I appreciate that recognition," I said carefully. "The tech entrepreneur segment has unique characteristics that standard investment models often miss." "Indeed." Elaine leaned forward slightly. "Which raises an interesting question. You've been with Meridian for 7 years now, progressing from analyst to strategist. Yet your compensation, while competitive, doesn't reflect the exceptional value you've created. This was unexpected. Senior leadership rarely initiated compensation discussions outside the annual review cycle. I've found my experience at Meridian valuable beyond the immediate compensation," I responded diplomatically. "Of course," Elaine agreed with a knowing smile. "The experience, the client exposure, the intellectual challenge, all important factors. But I've been wondering if we've reached an inflection point in our relationship." The phrasing struck me as peculiar. "What kind of inflection point?" Elaine sat back, studying me with increased intensity. "Olivia, I'll be direct. I've heard through industry channels that you've been approached by Axiom Capital about developing their technology, Investment Division. This was completely false. I had no communication with Axiom Capital, one of Meridian's primary competitors. The misinformation was peculiar enough that I momentarily struggled to formulate a response. I'm not sure where that information came from, I finally said. But it's inaccurate. I haven't been in discussions with Axiom or any other firm. Elaine's expression shifted subtly, revealing a flash of genuine surprise before returning to practiced neutrality. Interesting. The source seemed reliable. Perhaps they were testing waters without your knowledge. Perhaps, I allowed, though the explanation seemed improbable. Well, reliable or not, the conversation has prompted some internal reflection about your position here, Elaine continued smoothly. Your expertise in technology investment strategies has become increasingly valuable as that segment grows. The management committee believes we should proactively address your advancement rather than risk losing you to competitors. The situation was becoming clearer. Elaine had received some form of misinformation about my potential departure and was now engaged in a retention effort. The timing, immediately following Rebecca's discovery of my financial position, seemed unlikely to be coincidental. I appreciate the committee's consideration, I said. I've been very satisfied with my progression at Meridian. Nevertheless, we'd like to discuss a more substantive role. Elaine opened a folder on her desk, specifically creating a position as Director of Technology Investment Strategies, reporting directly to me. The role would include expanded client responsibilities, team leadership, and participation in investment committee decisions. The compensation adjustment would be significant. Base salary of $225,000 plus performance incentives that could double that figure in successful years. The proposal was objectively impressive, nearly doubling my current compensation while elevating my organizational standing considerably. A year earlier, I might have viewed it as a major achievement. Now, with financial independence already secured, my assessment focused more on the role's alignment with my longer-term objectives. That's a very generous offer, I acknowledged. I'd want to understand more about the specific responsibilities and expectations. Over the next 30 minutes, Elaine outlined a position that would indeed represent substantial advancement, increased authority, strategic input, and client engagement at the highest levels. Throughout her detailed explanation, I found myself evaluating the opportunity not simply as career progression, but as potential leverage for future possibilities beyond traditional employment. This is certainly compelling, I said when Elaine concluded her overview. I'd like to take some time to consider the details and perhaps discuss further refinements to ensure the role aligns optimally with both my strengths and Meridian's objectives. Elaine nodded, appearing pleased with my measured response. Of course. Take the weekend to review the formal documentation. We can reconvene Monday to address any questions. The management committee is eager to finalize this arrangement. As I left Elaine's office, my analytical mind was already processing the implications of this unexpected development. The timing, immediately following Rebecca's discovery of my financial position, suggested a possible connection, though the mechanism remained unclear. Had Rebecca inadvertently shared information about my finances with someone connected to Meridian? Or was this truly independent coincidence? Whatever the catalyst, the outcome presented interesting strategic possibilities. While financial independence had already provided freedom from conventional career concerns, this elevated position would create additional optionality, greater industry influence, enhanced client relationships, and increased visibility in investment circles that could prove valuable for future ventures. That evening, I met Rebecca at a quiet cafe in Capitol Hill, deliberately selected for privacy rather than Instagram aesthetics. She arrived looking uncharacteristically subdued, without her usual carefully crafted appearance. I told Mom about your secret financial empire, she announced without preamble as she slid into the booth across from me. The directness of her statement temporarily stunned me into silence. Of all possible outcomes from our confrontation, immediate disclosure to our mother hadn't occurred to me. "You did what?" I finally managed. Rebecca's expression was a mixture of defiance and sheepishness. I was still processing everything, and I needed perspective. Mom was the only person I could talk to about it. "I see." I kept my tone neutral while internally reassessing potential repercussions. Our mother, while loving, had always been somewhat indiscreet, particularly within her extensive social circle. And how did she react? Shocked at first, then oddly, proud, Rebecca admitted. Then she started asking 1,000 questions I couldn't answer, investment strategies and tax structures and things I know nothing about. She wanted to call you immediately, but I convinced her to give you space. The expanded information breach complicated my strategic position considerably. Family knowledge of my financial status would inevitably spread through various social networks, potentially reaching professional circles where such information could alter carefully established dynamics. "I also might have mentioned it to Jasmine," Rebecca added, studying her coffee intently, "when I was explaining why I was so upset about the apartment situation." The additional disclosure was concerning, but not entirely surprising. Jasmine had been Rebecca's closest friend since college, and their relationship involved extensive information sharing. "Anyone else?" I asked, keeping my voice even despite growing internal alarm. Rebecca hesitated momentarily. "Well, Jasmine's boyfriend Derek works in finance, some investment firm downtown. He had a lot of questions when Jasmine told him. Apparently, he was super impressed by what you've accomplished." The pieces suddenly aligned with alarming clarity. Derek worked at Axiom Capital, a detail I recalled from previous conversations with Rebecca. He had likely shared the information about my financial position within professional circles, creating the industry rumors that prompted Elaine's retention offer. "Derek works at Axiom," I stated rather than asked. Rebecca's eyes widened with realization. "Oh God, is that a problem?" "Jasmine mentioned he was really interested in how you built your portfolio so quickly. He said something about his firm always looking for people with your investment approach." The information cascade had moved even more quickly than I had feared. Within 24 hours of Rebecca's discovery, details of my financial position had traveled through personal and professional networks to reach potential employers and current management, triggering significant responses that would affect my career trajectory. Rather than expressing the frustration I felt, I took a deep breath and considered the situation from a strategic perspective. The unplanned disclosure had accelerated timeline shifts that were perhaps inevitable. The question wasn't how to reverse this information flow, but how to shape its impact to align with my longer-term objectives. "It's not ideal," I finally said, "but it's manageable. In the future, I'd appreciate if you'd consult me before sharing personal financial information with others." Rebecca looked genuinely contrite. "I'm really sorry. I wasn't thinking clearly. The whole revelation was just so unexpected, and I'm still processing that my seemingly ordinary sister is secretly wealthy enough to retire." Her characterization stung slightly, the implication that financial success was somehow incongruent with her perception of me as ordinary. It highlighted how thoroughly I had compartmentalized my life, presenting a deliberately understated exterior while building substantial assets. "I got an unexpected promotion offer today," I said, changing the subject slightly. "Director level. Position with significantly increased compensation." Rebecca's expression brightened. "That's amazing. See? Now that people know your capabilities, they're finally recognizing your value." Her interpretation wasn't entirely accurate. Meridian's offer stemmed from fear of losing me rather than suddenly discovered appreciation. However, the core insight had merit. Visibility, while creating certain complications, also generated opportunities that strategic invisibility precluded. "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "things are certainly changing quickly." "So will you take it? The promotion?" I considered the question carefully. I'm evaluating how it aligns with my longer-term objectives. Rebecca rolled her eyes with familiar exasperation. Only you would need to evaluate a major promotion. Most people would just celebrate. Different approaches work for different people, I replied mildly. Speaking of which, have you found a temporary housing solution? Rebecca's expression shifted subtly, suggesting the topic change wasn't entirely welcome but accepted. Sort of. Mom offered to help with a short-term rental when I told her about my situation. And your situation. Another complication, our mother's financial involvement would inevitably come with increased expectations and oversight of Rebecca's choices. While perhaps beneficial for her financial discipline, it would likely create tension as Rebecca bristled against perceived control. That seems like a reasonable temporary solution, I offered neutrally. I guess, Rebecca agreed without enthusiasm. But it made me think about something you said last night, about teaching me to create sustainable financial independence instead of just helping with immediate needs. The shift in conversation caught me by surprise. Rebecca had rarely expressed interest in financial management beyond immediate consumption decisions. I meant that, I confirmed. Financial knowledge is more valuable long-term than financial assistance. So teach me, she challenged, leaning forward intently. Not the whole millionaire strategy all at once, but the foundations. Where did you start? What were the first steps? The request was unexpected, but intriguing. An opportunity to share knowledge I had accumulated over years of careful study and implementation. More significantly, it represented a potential shift in our relationship dynamic from competitive siblings to collaborative learners with different strengths. The foundation isn't complex, I began, but it requires consistency most people find challenging. It starts with understanding the gap between income and expenses as your primary investment capital. Over the next hour, I outlined the basic principles that had guided my early financial decisions: living below my means, automating investment contributions, strategic tax planning, and focusing on total return rather than market timing. Rebecca listened with uncharacteristic attention, occasionally asking surprisingly insightful questions about implementation details. The hardest part isn't understanding the concepts, I explained as our conversation wound down. It's maintaining discipline. Through market volatility and lifestyle inflation pressures, financial independence requires psychological fortitude as much as mathematical understanding. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. That's the part I've always struggled with, delaying gratification when immediate options seem so appealing. My entire career is built around creating desire for immediate experiences and possessions. Her self-awareness was refreshing, suggesting capacity for growth I had perhaps underestimated. The conversation had revealed facets of my sister I hadn't fully appreciated: genuine curiosity, capacity for critical self-reflection, and willingness to consider alternative approaches. It's ultimately about alignment between values and behaviors, I suggested. When financial decisions reflect core priorities rather than momentary desires, consistency becomes easier. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Rebecca hesitated, then asked, "Would you be willing to look at my current financial situation? Help me develop an actual plan instead of just reacting to whatever happens next?" The request represented both opportunity and potential complication. Examining Rebecca's finances would inevitably involve uncomfortable revelations about consumption patterns and unsustainable choices. However, it also offered possibility for meaningful impact beyond my personal portfolio, using accumulated knowledge to help someone I cared about develop greater stability and optionality. I'm willing, I agreed, but it will require complete financial transparency and openness to potentially significant behavioral changes. I understand, Rebecca affirmed with surprising seriousness. After seeing what you've accomplished, I realize there's another approach worth considering. Maybe not to your extent, but something more sustainable than my current reality. As I walked home that evening, I found myself contemplating the unexpected trajectory of events since the cake confrontation. What had begun as uncomfortable disclosure had evolved into potential partnership, with Rebecca showing genuine interest in financial principles I had studied and implemented for years. More broadly, the forced shift from complete privacy to selective visibility was creating unexpected opportunities, professional advancement, knowledge sharing, and relationship recalibration. While information control had served important strategic purposes during my wealth accumulation phase, perhaps different approaches would better serve emerging objectives. When I reached my apartment, I found an email from Elaine with formal documentation of the proposed director position. The role details confirmed earlier discussions: expanded authority, strategic input across investment categories, and substantial compensation increases. The offer represented significant professional advancement by conventional metrics. Rather than immediately reviewing the details, however, I found myself opening a document I hadn't examined in nearly a year: my long-term strategic plan. This private roadmap outlined potential pathways beyond traditional employment, including specialized consulting, targeted angel investing, or establishing a boutique advisory practice for technology entrepreneurs. These alternatives had previously seemed distant possibilities, relevant only after additional years of institutional experience and network development. Now, with financial independence achieved and professional recognition accelerating, the timeline seemed less fixed. The director role could serve as either advancement within conventional structures or strategic positioning for eventual independence. As I updated the document to reflect recent developments, a notification appeared on my phone. A message from my mother. "Rebecca told me everything. So proud of what you've built. Let's talk soon about how to help her get on better financial footing. Love you both." The message confirmed what I had suspected. Rebecca's disclosure to our mother had fundamentally altered family dynamics, creating expectations of financial guidance and potential assistance. While potentially complicated, this shift also presented opportunities for meaningful impact within my closest relationships. I responded with deliberate positivity while maintaining appropriate boundaries. "Happy to discuss financial principles anytime. Looking forward to seeing you soon." Closing my laptop, I moved to the window overlooking the Seattle skyline, now illuminated against the evening darkness. The city had been the backdrop for my quiet wealth accumulation, a place where I had systematically built financial independence while maintaining strategic anonymity. That chapter had served its purpose, creating foundation and optionality few people my age enjoyed. The next phase would necessarily involve different approaches: strategic visibility rather than complete privacy, selective knowledge sharing rather than independent accumulation, and potentially leadership beyond organizational boundaries. The chocolate cake confrontation had accelerated this transition, creating both challenges and opportunities I hadn't anticipated. What remained constant was my fundamental approach: strategic assessment, disciplined implementation, and alignment between actions and longer-term objectives. The specific tactical elements might evolve, but the core methodology that had created my invisible empire would continue guiding decisions across changing circumstances. The following Monday morning, I arrived at Meridian's offices with unusual anticipation. My weekend had been dedicated to comprehensive strategic reassessment, evaluating the director position against longer-term objectives, mapping potential pathways for Rebecca's financial education, and recalibrating expectations around selective financial visibility. Elaine was already waiting when I reached the conference room designated for our follow-up discussion. She greeted me with evident eagerness, clearly anticipating straightforward acceptance of the generous offer. "I've reviewed the proposal documentation," I began after exchanging pleasantries. "The role alignment is compelling, but I'd like to propose several modifications that would optimize the arrangement for both Meridian and myself." Elaine's expression registered momentary surprise before shifting to cautious interest. "What kind of modifications?" "3 specific elements," I explained. opening my laptop to reference the detailed analysis I had prepared. First, expanded. Autonomy in investment strategy development for the technology segment. Second, dedicated research resources for emerging markets with high disruption potential. And third, flexible structure allowing for 4-day office presence with 1 day allocated to independent research and development. These requests weren't arbitrary, but strategically targeted, creating institutional space for exploring opportunities that might eventually support independent ventures while delivering immediate value to Meridian through enhanced innovation. Capacity. Elaine studied me with newfound curiosity. These are unusual requests for someone at your career stage. The compensation package already represents significant advancement. The compensation is certainly attractive, I acknowledged. These modifications focus on structural elements that would maximize my contribution to Meridian's strategic objectives. Our discussion extended nearly 2 hours, evolving into substantive negotiation rather than simple offer acceptance. Elaine initially resisted the flexibility components, but showed increasing receptivity as I articulated specific benefits to Meridian, enhanced innovation capacity, differentiated market positioning, and potential access to emerging opportunities outside traditional investment channels. By discussion's end, we had reached agreement on modified terms that represented meaningful victory for both parties. Meridian secured my expertise and client relationships with enhanced commitment, while I obtained structural elements that would facilitate longer-term strategic positioning. I'll draft the revised agreement for management committee review, Elaine concluded, gathering her materials. I don't anticipate any objections given the clear mutual benefit. As she prepared to leave, she paused, studying me with renewed intensity. You've changed, Olivia. There's a directness in your approach that wasn't visible previously. The observation was accurate. My negotiation style had shifted from the careful accommodation that had characterized my earlier career to more assertive articulation of value and expectations. This evolution wasn't spontaneous, but reflected strategic recalibration following recent disclosure events. I'm simply ensuring optimal alignment between my contributions and Meridian's objectives, I replied. Elaine nodded thoughtfully. Well, it's effective. I look forward to your leadership in this expanded capacity. As I returned to my office, I reflected on how thoroughly recent events had accelerated my professional evolution. The strategic anonymity that had served wealth accumulation objectives had been replaced by calibrated visibility that created different forms of opportunity. Rather than minimizing my capabilities to avoid scrutiny, I was now leveraging demonstrated expertise to create institutional conditions supporting longer-term independence. That evening, I received an unexpected call from my mother. She launched immediately into the conversation without preamble. Rebecca says you're helping her develop a financial plan. Is that true? We've discussed financial principles, I confirmed cautiously. She's expressed interest in developing more sustainable approaches. That's surprising, my mother admitted. Rebecca has never shown much interest in financial planning. She's always been focused on immediate opportunities rather than long-term stability. People can evolve, I suggested. Recent circumstances have perhaps highlighted the limitations of her current approach. My mother was silent briefly before continuing. I've been thinking about what Rebecca told me about your financial position. I have to admit, I was shocked. Not just at the amounts involved, but at how completely unaware I was of what you've been building. The observation carried complex emotional undertones, surprise, admiration, and perhaps subtle hurt at being excluded from significant aspects of my life. It wasn't personal exclusion, I explained carefully. Financial privacy served specific strategic purposes during the accumulation phase. I understand that intellectually, she acknowledged. It's just difficult as a parent to realize your child has been experiencing significant success without sharing that journey with you. The conversation revealed dimensions of my strategic privacy I hadn't fully considered, the emotional impact on family members who interpreted information compartmentalization as relationship distance rather than tactical methodology. While logical from wealth accumulation perspective, my approach had created unintended consequences in personal relationships. Moving forward, I'll be more transparent about financial matters, I offered. The strategic context has evolved, making privacy less essential than during early accumulation stages. My mother's tone warmed noticeably. I'd appreciate that. And I'm incredibly proud of what you've built, Olivia. Your approach is so different from anything in our family history, so methodical and disciplined. I'm just sorry we didn't recognize and support your capabilities earlier. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering aspects of my investment strategy, professional development, and potential approaches for supporting Rebecca's financial evolution. Throughout, I maintained the balanced disclosure that characterized my new approach, sharing meaningful information while preserving appropriate boundaries around specific implementation details. As our call concluded, my mother made an unexpected suggestion. I think your father needs to hear about all this directly from you. He's been particularly surprised by Rebecca's revelations, especially given his own struggles with retirement planning. The suggestion introduced additional complexity. My father had always maintained traditional perspectives on career progression and financial management, following conventional pathways that had produced adequate but unremarkable results. My divergent approach would likely challenge his established frameworks. I'm open to that conversation, I agreed, recognizing the opportunity to reshape another important relationship around more authentic understanding. Later that evening, as I was reviewing investment performance across various portfolio segments, I received a text from Rebecca. Just submitted rental application for temporary housing with Mom's help. Also, started tracking all expenses like you suggested, already horrified by food delivery totals for just 3 days. Financial awakening is painful. The message prompted unexpected smile, genuine amusement at Rebecca's characteristic dramatic expression combined with appreciation for her willingness to engage with uncomfortable financial realities. The initial steps were modest but represented meaningful shift from previous patterns. I responded with encouraging reinforcement. Awareness is the essential first step. Temporary discomfort leads to sustainable improvement. Her immediate reply carried familiar sarcastic humor. Easy for the secret millionaire to say. Some of us are still in the horrified by our Uber Eats addiction phase of financial evolution. The exchange highlighted how our relationship dynamic was evolving, maintaining familiar sisterly patterns while incorporating new dimensions of mutual respect and collaborative growth. The forced disclosure that had initially seemed potentially damaging had actually created conditions for more authentic connection. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone signaled one final message, an email from Elaine confirming management committee approval of our negotiated terms, with formal documents to follow. The institutional validation represented meaningful, professional advancement within traditional frameworks, even as my strategic focus increasingly incorporated possibilities beyond conventional employment. The developments of recent days had fundamentally altered my trajectory, not by changing core strategic objectives, but by accelerating timeline and evolving tactical approaches. The strategic anonymity that had facilitated wealth accumulation had served its purpose, creating foundation for the next phase where selective visibility could generate different forms of opportunity. The chocolate cake confrontation had triggered cascading changes across multiple dimensions: professional advancement, family dynamics, and personal strategy. What had initially seemed potential disaster had instead become catalyst for evolution, toward objectives that had always existed but now seemed increasingly accessible. As Seattle's lights glimmered beyond my window, I found myself contemplating not just what I had built, but what might be constructed next. Not just financial assets, but relationship capital. Not just personal wealth, but meaningful impact. The invisible empire had served its purpose, creating foundation for more expansive possibilities that were only beginning to emerge. 3 weeks after accepting the director position at Meridian, I found myself seated across from my father in an upscale restaurant near his downtown Portland office. The formal setting had been his choice, perhaps an unconscious effort to establish familiar territory for what promised to be an unfamiliar conversation. At 63, James Chen maintained the precise appearance that had characterized his 30-year career as a civil engineer. His meticulously pressed shirt and carefully knotted tie reflected the orderly approach he brought to both professional projects and personal finance, consistent, methodical, and fundamentally conventional. "Your mother says you have something important to discuss," he began after we had ordered, his tone carrying the slight wariness that typically accompanied our adult interactions. The relationship between us had always been cordial but somewhat distant, defined more by mutual respect than emotional closeness. Where my mother had responded to my childhood introversion with concerned encouragement, my father had simply accepted it as natural temperament, neither pushing for change nor particularly celebrating my divergent approach. "I wanted to share some professional and financial developments directly," I explained. "Mom mentioned that Rebecca has already discussed certain aspects with you." My father's expression tightened slightly. "Rebecca made some claims about your financial position that seemed exaggerated. I assumed there was some misunderstanding." His skepticism wasn't surprising. Throughout my childhood, he had emphasized traditional financial principles, steady saving, modest investing through employer retirement plans, and gradual wealth accumulation over decades. The accelerated timeline and scale Rebecca had described would naturally seem implausible within his established framework. Rebecca's information was generally accurate, I confirmed. "I've been implementing a systematic investment strategy since joining Meridian, focusing on technology growth sectors and compounding returns. The results have been significant." My father's expression remained dubious. "Rebecca suggested you've accumulated nearly $2 million. That's not possible on an analyst's salary in 7 years, even with aggressive saving." Rather than immediately challenging his conclusion, I took a measured approach. "Would you be interested in understanding the specific methodology that made it possible?" He nodded, professional curiosity temporarily overriding skepticism. Over the next 30 minutes, I outlined my investment strategy in terms that would resonate with his engineering mindset: systematic capital allocation, compounding mathematics, strategic sector selection, and disciplined implementation regardless of market volatility. As I explained the quantitative foundations of my approach, I watched his expression transition from doubt to tentative recognition of mathematical possibility, and finally to a complex mixture of surprise and something that appeared to be retrospective: reassessment. "I always knew you were methodical," he said when I concluded my explanation. "Even as a child, you approached problems differently than Rebecca, more systematically, more analytically. But this level of financial engineering—" He paused, searching for appropriate words. "It's remarkable, and completely outside our family's experience with money." The acknowledgement represented significant shift in our relationship dynamic. For perhaps the first time, my father was recognizing my approach not merely as different, but as potentially superior in certain contexts. "Different methodologies serve different objectives," I suggested. "Your approach provided family stability and security throughout our childhood. Mine prioritizes accelerated timeline toward financial independence." He nodded slowly, processing this frame. "And you've achieved that independence already? At 32? "By technical definition, yes," I confirmed. "My investment portfolio generates sufficient sustainable income to cover reasonable expenses indefinitely. However, I'm continuing professional advancement to create additional optionality and impact." My father took a long sip of his water, his expression suggesting internal recalibration. "I've spent 40 years following conventional financial wisdom, steady saving, company retirement plans, paying down the mortgage. It's worked adequately, but nothing like what you've described. The implicit comparison carried complicated emotional undertones. My father had always taken pride in his role as family provider and financial manager. Learning that his daughter had achieved in 7 years what he hadn't accomplished in 4 decades potentially challenged his self-perception in uncomfortable ways. Different eras present different opportunities, I offered. The technology, growth cycle, and information accessibility of the past decade created conditions that weren't available during your early career. He nodded again, accepting this perspective with visible relief. That's true. The investment landscape has transformed considerably. When I started working, company pension plans and home equity were the primary wealth-building vehicles for most professionals. The conversation shifted to my recent promotion, allowing my father to engage from a more comfortable position of traditional career advancement. He asked detailed questions about responsibilities, reporting structure, and strategic objectives, familiar territory that re-established his paternal role as experienced professional offering guidance to his daughter. As our meal concluded, however, he returned to the financial discussion with unexpected directness. I should have recognized your capabilities earlier. The signs were there. Your approach to problem solving, your comfort with complex systems, your patience with long-term processes. We just didn't have the frameworks to fully appreciate how those traits might translate into exceptional financial outcomes. The acknowledgement was delivered matter-of-factly, but its significance wasn't lost on me. My father rarely expressed retrospective reassessment of his judgments. We each operate from available information and established patterns, I replied. I've benefited from exposure to alternative approaches through my professional position. Would you be willing to review our retirement portfolio? He asked after brief hesitation. Not to make dramatic changes, but to evaluate whether certain adjustments might be appropriate given current market conditions. The request represented meaningful shift in our relationship dynamic, acknowledging my expertise in domain where he had previously maintained unquestioned authority. It offered opportunity to provide tangible value while establishing new patterns of engagement based on mutual respect rather than traditional parent-child hierarchies. I'd be happy to review your current positions and discuss potential optimization, I agreed. We could establish regular quarterly assessments to ensure alignment with evolving objectives. My father nodded with evident satisfaction, perhaps appreciating the structured approach that reflected his own methodical nature. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, he made one final observation. Rebecca mentioned you're helping her develop more sustainable financial habits. That's unexpected. She's never shown much interest in systematic approaches. People can evolve when presented with compelling evidence, I suggested. Rebecca's creative intelligence gives her capacity for rapid adaptation when properly motivated. He considered this perspective with visible reassessment of his younger daughter's capabilities. Perhaps you're right. I've tended to view her artistic orientation as fundamentally incompatible with financial discipline. That assumption may have been limiting for all of us. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, our farewell carried different quality than previous interactions. Mutual respect between adults with different but complementary capabilities rather than prescribed familial roles. The conversation had fundamentally altered our relationship dynamic, creating foundation for more authentic engagement based on current realities rather than historical patterns. During the train journey back to Seattle, I found myself contemplating the cascading effects of Rebecca's cake-throwing confrontation. What had initially seemed catastrophic breach of strategic privacy had instead catalyzed significant positive developments across multiple dimensions: professional advancement, family relationship recalibration, and expanded impact opportunities. The experience reinforced crucial strategic principle: disruption creates opportunity for those positioned to recognize and leverage changing conditions. While I hadn't planned or initiated the privacy breach, My foundational preparation had created resilience that transformed potential setback into advancement catalyst. Upon returning to my apartment that evening, I found an unexpected package waiting outside my door. Sleek gift bag with handwritten note from Rebecca. Sorry again. About the cake assault. Thought you might appreciate replacement sweater that's not covered in chocolate frosting. P.S. Just got approved for the temporary rental. Moving in next week. Financial planning session soon? The gesture reflected the evolving dynamics of our relationship, maintaining characteristic humor while acknowledging both past behavior and future collaboration. The reference to financial planning suggested continued commitment to developing more sustainable approaches, though whether this represented temporary enthusiasm or meaningful transformation remained to be seen. I texted brief acknowledgement. Sweater appreciated. Congratulations on housing approval. Available next Thursday evening for planning session if convenient. Rebecca's immediate response carried her typical effusive style. Thursday perfect. I'll bring dinner, responsibly. Budgeted, of course. Prepared to be impressed by my spreadsheet tracking all purchases since cake incident. Who even am I anymore? The exchange prompted unexpected smile. Genuine amusement at Rebecca's characteristic self-dramatization combined with appreciation for her willingness to engage with unfamiliar methodologies. While sustainable financial transformation would require more than 3 weeks of expense tracking, her initial steps demonstrated capacity for behavioral adaptation that I had perhaps underestimated. The following morning at Meridian began with transition meetings into my new director role. The process involved detailed knowledge transfer from departing leadership, team introduction sessions, and strategic alignment discussions with fellow directors. Throughout these interactions, I maintained balanced approach, demonstrating comprehensive capability while avoiding unnecessary display that might trigger competitive responses from new peers. During afternoon break between sessions, I received message from Elaine requesting private conversation before day's end. When I arrived at her office at the appointed time, I found her reviewing detailed account statements with unusual intensity. Thank you for making time, Olivia, she began, gesturing for me to take a seat. I wanted to discuss a client opportunity that appears particularly aligned with your expertise. Her tone suggested this wasn't routine client allocation, but something warranting special attention. I maintained neutral expression while internally assessing potential strategic implications of this unexpected development. We've been approached by Thomas Whitman, Elaine continued, referencing prominent technology entrepreneur who had recently sold his cybersecurity company for approximately $300 million. He's seeking comprehensive wealth management services, with particular focus on next-generation technology investments. The opportunity was indeed significant. Whitman was not only wealthy, but influential within technology ecosystems, with connections to venture capital networks and emerging startups. Across multiple sectors, his portfolio would represent substantial assets under management, while potentially providing access to investment opportunities not available through conventional channels. That's certainly aligned with our capabilities, I acknowledged. His background suggests sophisticated understanding of technology investment landscapes. Precisely, Elaine agreed, which is why his specific request is particularly interesting. She paused momentarily before continuing. He's asked for you, personally as his primary advisor. Apparently, he's heard about your investment approach from mutual connections and was impressed by your results. The request was unexpected and somewhat concerning. It suggested information about my personal investment performance was circulating through professional networks beyond my initial disclosure to Rebecca. The privacy breach was expanding beyond family circles into industry relationships with potential impact on carefully established professional positioning. That's unusual, I noted carefully. Client assignments typically follow standardized allocation processes based on portfolio size and complexity. Elaine nodded acknowledgement. Unusual but not unprecedented for clients of Whitman's caliber. The management committee has already approved the exception given the relationship potential. The question is whether you're comfortable with the assignment given your recent role transition. The situation presented both opportunity and complication. Whitman's portfolio would provide expanded visibility within Meridian's leadership, while creating potential platform for industry influence beyond institutional boundaries. However, it would also increase scrutiny of my investment methodology and results, potentially compromising strategic positioning for future independent ventures. I'm certainly interested, I confirmed after brief consideration. However, I'd want to ensure proper support structures given my broader team responsibilities in the new role. Elaine seemed pleased with my response. That's easily arranged. We can assign additional analyst support specifically for Whitman's portfolio while maintaining your direct advisory relationship. As our discussion concluded with implementation details, I found myself contemplating the accelerating expansion of my professional visibility. The containment breach that had begun with Rebecca's discovery was creating widening circles of awareness about my capabilities and results, generating opportunities that strategic privacy had previously limited. The pattern suggested important strategic insight. Different phases of professional development might require different approaches to information management. The privacy that had facilitated undisturbed wealth accumulation during early career might actually constrain impact and advancement opportunities at more established career stages. That evening, I devoted several hours to reviewing Thomas Whitman's available financial information in preparation for our initial meeting the following week. His portfolio reflected sophisticated understanding of technology markets, concentrated positions in established software companies balanced with strategic investments in emerging sectors and targeted venture allocations. His investment approach demonstrated clear pattern recognition and sector expertise similar to my own methodology, though implemented with greater resources and access to privileged deal flow through his industry position. The alignment suggested potential for productive advisory relationship based on mutual recognition rather than traditional expert-client hierarchy. While completing this analysis, I received unexpected video call from Rebecca. When I answered, I found her sitting cross-legged on what appeared to be temporary apartment floor, surrounded by packing boxes and unassembled furniture. "Welcome to my fiscally responsible housing decision," she announced with characteristic, dramatic flair, panning her phone to show modest but pleasant studio apartment. Significantly below my original budget and only minimally Instagram-worthy, but the spreadsheet approved it enthusiastically. Her reference to the spreadsheet reflected basic expense tracking template I had created for her following our initial financial discussions. The implementation demonstrated both practical commitment to financial organization and characteristic Rebecca humor in personifying analytical tools. "It looks perfectly functional," I observed. "Significantly more practical than maintaining unsustainable housing costs." "That's exactly what the spreadsheet said," Rebecca laughed. "You two are eerily similar. Anyway, I'm calling because I just got offered interesting opportunity and wanted your strategic perspective before deciding." The framing represented notable shift in our relationship dynamic, Rebecca seeking analytical input rather than emotional validation for pending decisions. While perhaps temporary adjustment following recent financial revelations, it nevertheless suggested potential for more balanced engagement patterns moving forward. "What kind of opportunity?" I asked. "Consulting contract with lifestyle company. Launching Pacific Northwest content vertical," she explained, visible excitement animating her expression. "They want authentic regional perspective from established creator, which somehow means me despite being here exactly 3 days." Rebecca proceeded to outline proposal details. 6-month contract creating location-specific content highlighting regional attractions, cultural elements, and lifestyle components. The compensation structure included base retainer plus performance incentives based on engagement metrics and conversion analytics. The base payment would cover all essential expenses, she continued, referencing figures that aligned with budgeting framework we had developed. The performance components would contribute to building actual savings if audience engagement reaches projected thresholds. What struck me about her presentation wasn't simply the economic analysis, but the strategic framing, evaluating opportunity through lens of sustainable financial architecture rather than immediate gratification or status considerations that had previously dominated her decision-making. The structure seems aligned with establishing more predictable income foundation, I observed. What are your primary considerations in evaluating the opportunity? 3 main factors, Rebecca replied with unexpected methodical approach. First, establishing sustainable financial foundation that aligns with revised budgeting framework. Second, building location-specific expertise that creates differentiated positioning within saturated creator market. Third, developing business relationships within Seattle ecosystem, rather than remaining dependent on Los Angeles connections. The analytical framework suggested meaningful evolution in Rebecca's approach, considering longer-term strategic positioning and systematic relationship development, rather than pursuing immediate visibility or status markers. While maintaining her characteristic enthusiasm, she had incorporated structural elements more aligned with sustainable career development. That's comprehensive evaluation, I acknowledged, genuine appreciation evident in my tone. The framework addresses both immediate financial considerations and longer-term strategic positioning. Rebecca's expression reflected visible satisfaction at this validation of her analytical approach. I've been studying your methods, she admitted. Not the complex investment strategies yet, but the underlying thinking patterns. Systematic evaluation, prioritizing long-term outcomes over immediate gratification, creating optionality rather than dependency. The observation was surprisingly insightful, recognizing that my financial results stemmed not simply from technical investment knowledge, but from fundamental cognitive frameworks that could be applied across various domains. Rebecca had identified transferable elements of my approach that complemented her existing creative capabilities. Those principles have broad applicability, I confirmed. The specific implementation varies across contexts, but the underlying methodology remains consistent. Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, exploring both practical aspects of her potential contract and broader implications for her evolving career strategy. Throughout the discussion, I observed increasing integration of analytical frameworks with her natural creative thinking, using systematic evaluation to enhance rather than replace her intuitive approaches. As our call concluded with her decision to accept the contract with minor negotiated adjustments, Rebecca made final observation that suggested meaningful perspective shift. You know what's weird? I've spent years chasing the external trappings of success, the right apartment, the visible lifestyle, the curated social presence. Meanwhile, you've been quietly building actual independence that creates genuine options. I'm starting to think your approach might be the truly creative one. The insight demonstrated remarkable self-awareness and capacity for paradigm reassessment. While sustainable transformation would require consistent implementation over extended timeframe, Rebecca's evolving perspective suggested potential for meaningful development beyond temporary enthusiasm. After ending the call, I found myself contemplating the unexpected outcomes of the cake confrontation that had occurred just 4 weeks earlier. What had initially appeared catastrophic privacy breach threatening carefully constructed strategic positioning had instead catalyzed significant positive developments across multiple dimensions: professional advancement through accelerated promotion and expanded client relationships, family dynamic recalibration based on authentic capabilities rather than historical patterns, expanded impact opportunities through knowledge sharing and collaborative growth, enhanced positioning for future independent ventures through strategic visibility and network development. The pattern reinforced crucial strategic principle. Disruption creates asymmetric opportunity for those prepared to recognize and leverage changing conditions. While I hadn't initiated the circumstances that revealed my financial position, my foundational preparation had created resilience that transformed potential setback into advancement catalyst. More fundamentally, the experience highlighted how different strategic approaches serve different development phases. The privacy that had facilitated undisturbed wealth accumulation during early career had created necessary foundation. But maintaining that same approach indefinitely would have limited impact potential once that foundation was established. As Seattle's evening skyline illuminated beyond my window, I recognized that the chocolate cake incident hadn't derailed my strategic trajectory, but accelerated evolution toward objectives that had always existed beneath the surface. Not just personal financial independence, but expanded capability to create value through knowledge sharing, relationship development, and systematic impact beyond individual portfolio growth. The invisible empire hadn't been destroyed but transformed, from solely private wealth accumulation to platform for expanded impact across professional relationships, family dynamics, and potential future ventures. The frosting-smeared confrontation that had initially seemed disaster had actually been catalyst for strategic evolution that was both necessary and ultimately beneficial. Different phases require different approaches. The wisdom lies not in rigid adherence to established patterns, but in recognizing when changing circumstances demand strategic evolution, even when that evolution arrives unexpectedly, covered in chocolate cake. 6 months after the cake incident, I sat in my office at Meridian reviewing quarterly performance metrics for my technology investment division. The numbers were exceptional: 18% growth against industry benchmark of 11%, client retention at 97%, and new asset acquisition exceeding targets by nearly $40 million. By conventional measures, my transition to director had been remarkably successful. What the metrics didn't capture was the broader transformation occurring across multiple dimensions of my professional and personal landscape. The strategic recalibration following Rebecca's discovery had created expanding circles of opportunity that extended well beyond institutional advancement. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder: lunch meeting with Thomas Whitman in 30 minutes. Over the past 5 months, what had begun as standard client relationship had evolved into something more nuanced, a collaborative partnership where traditional advisor-client boundaries had gradually blurred into mutual exchange of insights and opportunities. As I gathered materials for our meeting, Michael appeared at my office door with a folder of documents requiring signature. He had transitioned with me to the director role, his position evolving from administrative assistant to operations coordinator with expanded responsibilities and compensation. Final paperwork for the Bennett Foundation allocation, he explained, placing the folder on my desk. Also, Rebecca called. She said it's not urgent but wanted to remind you about dinner tomorrow. Something about massive financial triumph she wants to celebrate. I smiled at the characterization. Rebecca's definitional scale for financial achievements remained charmingly expansive. What qualified as massive triumph in her framework might be modest by conventional standards, but represented meaningful progress in her evolving financial journey. Thank you, Michael, I acknowledged, signing the allocation documents after brief review. Did she mention what kind of triumph? Something about exceeding performance targets on her content contract, he replied. She seemed particularly excited about actualization of compound metrics, whatever that means. The reference suggested Rebecca was tracking cumulative performance indicators rather than isolated engagement metrics, a more sophisticated analytical approach than her previous focus on individual content popularity. The terminology reflected conceptual frameworks from our ongoing financial discussions, applied to her creative professional context. Progress indeed, I noted with genuine appreciation. Please confirm our dinner reservation at Cascadia for 7 tomorrow evening. After Michael departed, I completed final preparations for the Whitman meeting, before heading to the restaurant 2 blocks from Meridian's offices. The venue was deliberately selected for its privacy, recessed booths, with sufficient separation to ensure confidential conversation without appearing unnecessarily secretive. Thomas Whitman was already seated when I arrived, reviewing documents on his tablet with characteristic intensity. At 47, he maintained the focused energy that had driven his technology career from programming prodigy to successful entrepreneur, and now, strategic investor. He stood as I approached, greeting me with the direct efficiency that characterized our interactions. "Olivia, good to see you," he said, gesturing to the waiting seat. "I've been reviewing the allocation adjustments you proposed. The semiconductor positioning is particularly intriguing given current supply constraints." Our conversation began with standard portfolio review, performance metrics, sector allocations, and strategic positioning relative to emerging technology trends. The discussion reflected mutual technical fluency and shared recognition of innovation, patterns that traditional investors frequently overlooked. After completing the formal review, Whitman's demeanor shifted subtly, indicating transition to the collaborative exchanges that had increasingly characterized our meetings. "I've been evaluating a pre-seed investment opportunity that might interest you," he began, activating his tablet. "Early-stage artificial intelligence application focused on medical diagnostics. The technical architecture implements novel approach to multimodal data integration that appears significantly more efficient than current methodologies." He transferred the relevant files to my tablet, continuing his assessment while I reviewed the technical documentation. The founding team includes 2 former researchers from my cybersecurity company, plus clinical specialist from Johns Hopkins. They're raising initial $3 million to develop functional prototype demonstrating efficacy across 3 diagnostic categories. The opportunity reflected Whitman's typical investment pattern: early engagement with technically differentiated solutions addressing substantial markets with high regulatory complexity. His personal network provided access to promising ventures before conventional venture capital involvement, creating potential for exceptional returns from select investments. What was atypical was his direct sharing of the opportunity outside established investment syndicate. Our previous discussions had included theoretical assessment of emerging technologies, but this represented first instance of specific investment opportunity where participation might be possible. "The technical approach appears sound," I noted, after reviewing key architecture documents. "The multimodal integration method addresses significant limitations in current diagnostic platforms. What's your assessment of regulatory pathway complexity?" We spent the next 40 minutes engaged in detailed analysis of the opportunity's technical merits, market positioning, and potential implementation challenges. The discussion reflected unusual parity. Whitman engaged with my assessments as equal analytical contribution rather than client service interaction. As our technical evaluation concluded, Whitman shifted to unexpected topic. "I've been meaning to ask about your personal investment methodology," he said, studying me with characteristic directness. "My network includes some impressive analysts, but few have achieved your results with comparable starting resources and timeline." The question crossed traditional professional boundaries, directly addressing personal financial management rather than client portfolio considerations. The inquiry suggested information about my private financial position had continued circulating through professional networks, extending well beyond the initial disclosure to Rebecca. I maintained neutral expression while carefully considering response options. The strategic privacy that had facilitated wealth accumulation had been compromised months earlier, creating new landscape where selective disclosure might generate different forms of opportunity than continued concealment. My approach prioritizes systematic allocation toward asymmetric opportunities, I explained after brief consideration, particularly focusing on technology sectors where traditional valuation frameworks inadequately capture growth potential due to exponential rather than linear development patterns. Whitman nodded with evident interest. The conceptual framework makes sense. What's more unusual is the disciplined implementation over extended time frame. Most individual investors with comparable insights lack the psychological infrastructure to maintain systematic allocation during market volatility or lifestyle inflation pressures. The observation demonstrated unusual perceptiveness, recognizing that investment success derived not merely from analytical frameworks, but from psychological discipline that enabled consistent implementation, despite environmental pressures toward deviation. Implementation discipline represents significant competitive advantage, I acknowledged, particularly for individual investors without institutional constraints. Whitman's expression suggested renewed assessment. That observation reflects unusual self-awareness about the psychological dimensions of wealth creation. Most investment professionals focus exclusively on analytical frameworks, while underestimating behavioral factors that determine actual implementation outcomes. Our conversation continued along these lines, examining investment methodology as integrated system combining analytical frameworks, psychological discipline, and strategic positioning. Throughout the discussion, traditional client-advisor boundaries increasingly dissolved into collaborative exchange between peers with complementary expertise. As our meeting concluded, Whitman made unexpected proposal. I'm hosting small dinner next week with select investors from my network. The conversation focuses on emerging technology opportunities outside conventional venture pathways. Your perspective would be valuable if you're interested in participating. The invitation represented significant evolution in our professional relationship, transition from client service interaction to peer network engagement with potential for expanded opportunity access and strategic positioning. The development reflected broader pattern following my strategic recalibration toward selective visibility rather than comprehensive privacy. I'd be interested in participating, I confirmed, though I should note potential complexity given my position at Meridian. Whitman nodded understanding. Institutional roles create certain constraints. The gathering operates under Chatham House rules, with clear separation between conceptual discussion and specific investment considerations. Several participants maintain similar dual positioning within institutional frameworks. As I returned to Meridian's offices following our meeting, I found myself contemplating the accelerating evolution of my professional positioning. What had begun as straightforward client relationship was transitioning toward collaborative engagement with potential implications well beyond institutional boundaries. The pattern extended beyond Whitman to include several similar developments across my expanding professional network. The strategic visibility following Rebecca's discovery had triggered cascading opportunities that my previous privacy approach would have precluded. Introductions to specialized investment networks, invitations to exclusive technology forums, and access to pre-market opportunities typically restricted to established insiders. That evening, I devoted several hours to comprehensive assessment of my evolving strategic landscape. The analysis focused not simply on immediate developments, but longer-term implications across multiple dimensions: professional advancement, investment opportunity access, relationship network development, and potential pathways toward expanded impact. The emerging pattern suggested important strategic insight. Different phases of wealth creation require different approaches to visibility, network development, and opportunity access. The privacy that had facilitated undisturbed accumulation during foundation building had served its purpose, creating platform for evolution toward collaborative engagement that could access opportunities unavailable to isolated operators, regardless of analytical capability. While completing this strategic assessment, I received call from Rebecca. Her characteristic enthusiasm was immediately evident as she launched into excited narrative without preamble. "You won't believe what happened. The performance metrics for my Pacific Northwest content series exceeded targets by 43%. The contract bonus structure activated at the highest tier." Her excitement was understandable. The achievement represented first instance of performance-based compensation, significantly exceeding baseline expectations in her evolving career approach. More importantly, it validated the strategic repositioning she had implemented following our financial discussions months earlier. "That's exceptional performance," I acknowledged, genuine appreciation evident in my tone. "Particularly impressive for content series established in entirely new regional market." "The systematic approach actually worked," Rebecca continued, her voice reflecting mixture of surprise and satisfaction. "Analyzing engagement patterns across content categories, adjusting production allocation based on performance metrics, reinvesting successful elements into expanded series development. It's basically your investment methodology applied to content creation." The observation demonstrated remarkable conceptual transfer, applying fundamental principles from financial methodology to creative professional domain without direct template. Rebecca had extracted core systematic elements and adapted them to entirely different context while maintaining essential disciplined implementation approach. "Transferring fundamental principles across domains often yields unexpected benefits," I noted. "The underlying methodology has broad applicability beyond specific financial implementation." "That's what I've been realizing," Rebecca agreed, her tone reflecting genuine intellectual engagement rather than transient enthusiasm. "The content itself is still creative expression, but the strategic framework around production, distribution, and engagement optimization follows systematic patterns similar to your investment allocation approach." Our conversation continued, with detailed discussion of specific optimization techniques she had implemented, metrics used for performance evaluation, and strategic adjustments based on emerging audience engagement patterns. Throughout the exchange, I observed Rebecca's evolving integration of systematic methodology with creative implementation, using analytical frameworks to enhance rather than constrain her natural expressive capabilities. As our call concluded, Rebecca made final observation that suggested meaningful perspective evolution. 6 months ago, I thought financial independence was about having enough money to do whatever you want, whenever you want. Now I'm understanding it's actually about creating systems that generate sustainable results without requiring constant intervention. It's about designing the machine, not just chasing the output. The insight demonstrated remarkable conceptual development, moving beyond superficial understanding of financial outcomes toward deeper recognition of systematic processes that generate sustainable results across various domains. While Rebecca's implementation remained at early stages, her conceptual framework had evolved significantly from the emotional reactivity displayed during the cake confrontation. The following evening, I met Rebecca at Cascadia Restaurant to celebrate her contract achievement. She arrived looking noticeably different from our previous encounters, professionally polished yet understated, without the carefully curated aesthetic that had previously characterized her public appearance. The change suggested evolving priorities beyond immediate impression management toward more sustainable personal presentation. "I closed my first independent investment account today," she announced after we were seated, producing tablet displaying brokerage statement with evident pride. "Nothing fancy, just basic index fund allocation with automatic monthly contributions from the contract bonus. But it's officially the beginning of the Rebecca Chen investment empire, microscopic edition." The development represented meaningful milestone, transition from theoretical financial discussions toward practical implementation of long-term wealth creation strategies. While modest by objective standards, the systematic approach demonstrated fundamental shift from consumption-focused financial management toward sustainable accumulation methodology. "The beginning is the most significant step," I acknowledged, genuine appreciation evident in my response. "Systematic implementation over time generates compounding results that often surprise even the most optimistic initial projections." "That's what I'm counting on," Rebecca agreed with characteristic enthusiasm. "I've been modeling potential outcomes using that projection spreadsheet you created. Even with conservative return estimates, the 30-year calculations are mind-blowing. Compared to my previous save-whatever's-left approach, our dinner conversation continued with detailed discussion of her evolving financial implementation, professional development, and strategic positioning within the content creator ecosystem. Throughout the exchange, I observed Rebecca's remarkable evolution from reactive consumption-focused decision-making toward systematic approach, integrating long-term considerations with immediate creative expression. As our meal concluded, Rebecca handed me small gift box with exaggerated ceremonial presentation. Official peace offering to replace the chocolate projectile from 6 months ago, she explained with characteristic humor. Consider it acknowledgement that your way of building success might actually have some merit, despite being catastrophically boring to watch in real time. Inside the box, I found elegant leather-bound notebook with embossed initials, an inscription reading, "The Invisible, Empire Builder, documentation of extraordinary ordinary brilliance." The gift reflected both Rebecca's creative sensibility and her evolving appreciation for methodical approaches previously dismissed as excessively constrained. "For recording your world domination strategies," she elaborated with smile combining genuine affection with residual ironic distance. Since apparently writing things down and actually following through on them is the secret superpower I've been missing all these years. The gesture represented meaningful acknowledgement of different but complementary approaches, Rebecca's creative expressiveness and my systematic methodology, each offering distinctive advantages when properly implemented. The evolving relationship dynamic suggested potential for collaborative growth, leveraging our respective strengths rather than comparative assessment based on singular success metrics. The following week brought series of developments that further expanded my professional horizons. The dinner gathering at Whitman's residence introduced me to select network of technology investors operating across institutional boundaries, former entrepreneurs, family office directors, and strategically positioned executives with exceptional access to emerging opportunities. The discussions reflected unusual conceptual depth, examining technological inflection points, regulatory evolution patterns, and implementation pathways with sophisticated understanding rarely found in conventional investment circles. Throughout the evening, I contributed targeted insights on specific technology evolution patterns, establishing position as knowledgeable participant rather than peripheral observer. As the formal dinner concluded, several participants engaged me in follow-up conversations reflecting genuine interest in my perspective, rather than professional courtesy. These interactions suggested potential for ongoing engagement with network offering access to opportunities and insights well beyond institutional boundaries. 3 days later, I received unexpected communication from Elaine requesting meeting to discuss strategic opportunity with unusual urgency. When I arrived at her office at the appointed time, I found her reviewing documents with characteristic intensity, though her expression suggested complexity beyond standard operational matters. "Thank you for making time on short notice," she began after greeting exchanges. "A situation has developed that requires immediate attention and potentially creates significant opportunity." Her unusually direct approach suggested matters of considerable institutional importance rather than routine operational considerations. I maintained neutral expression while internally assessing potential strategic implications of this unexpected development. "Meridian has been approached about potential acquisition," Elaine continued without preamble. "Westridge Capital has expressed interest in purchasing our operations as platform for expanded wealth management services, targeting technology sector clients." The information was genuinely surprising. Meridian had operated as independent firm throughout its 30-year history, with ownership distributed among senior partners rather than external investors. Westridge Capital represented significant industry force with substantial resources and aggressive growth strategy focused on specialized market segments. "The management committee has mixed perspectives on the approach," Elaine continued. Some partners see attractive monetization opportunity given the valuation multiples being discussed. Others have concerns about cultural integration and potential client retention challenges. The situation presented complex institutional dynamics, with different stakeholders likely prioritizing varied considerations based on career stage, financial position, and professional objectives. My recent promotion meant I held no equity stake in the firm, positioning me as informed observer rather than direct decision participant in ownership discussions. That context is helpful, I acknowledged. How does this connect to the immediate opportunity you mentioned? Elaine's expression shifted to more focused engagement. The Westridge representatives have specifically identified your technology investment division as central strategic asset in their acquisition interest. Your client relationships, investment methodology, and performance metrics represent significant portion of the valuation premium they've proposed. The information created immediate strategic complexity. My recent professional advancement and expanding client relationships had apparently created institutional value well beyond my direct compensation, potentially influencing major ownership transition affecting numerous stakeholders. They've requested direct conversation with you as part of their due diligence process, Elaine continued. The management committee has approved the interaction given its potential impact on overall valuation considerations. The situation presented both opportunity and potential complication. Direct engagement with acquisition representatives would create visibility at senior leadership levels within major industry player, potentially expanding professional network regardless of transaction outcome. However, the interaction would require careful balancing of institutional loyalties with personal strategic positioning during period of significant organizational flux. I understand the strategic considerations, I confirmed. When is the conversation scheduled? Tomorrow morning, Elaine replied. Their due diligence team has accelerated timeline given competitive dynamics in the acquisition landscape. The management committee has authorized comprehensive information sharing given potential transaction benefits. As our meeting concluded with logistical details, I found myself contemplating the accelerating cascade of developments following Rebecca's chocolate cake confrontation. What had begun as contained privacy breach within family relationship had expanded into institutional visibility that now potentially influenced major corporate transaction with implications for numerous stakeholders. That evening, I devoted several hours to comprehensive preparation for the Westridge conversation, reviewing division performance metrics, client relationship structures, investment methodologies, and team composition. The analysis focused not simply on historical results, but strategic positioning relative to evolving market landscape and competitive differentiation factors. While completing this preparation, I received message from Whitman regarding the AI diagnostics investment opportunity he had shared previously. Founding team accelerating capital raise given increased competitive pressure. Syndicate closing. Within 48 hours if interested. Minimum allocation $250K with standard terms. The timing created interesting strategic alignment. Potential participation in promising early-stage investment, concurrent with discussions that might influence my institutional positioning, at precisely the moment when Meridian's ownership structure faced potential transformation. The convergence suggested important inflection point across multiple dimensions of my professional landscape. After brief consideration, I responded affirmatively to Whitman's investment opportunity while completing preparation for the Westridge discussion. The parallel developments represented expanding horizon of possibilities emerging from strategic recalibration that had followed Rebecca's cake-throwing confrontation 6 months earlier. The following morning, I arrived at Meridian's executive conference room 15 minutes before the scheduled Westridge meeting. The space had been prepared for formal presentation, with detailed performance metrics and client relationship structures displayed across multiple screens. Elaine was already present, reviewing final materials with evident attention to presentational details. The Westridge team arrives in 10 minutes, she noted as I entered. Their group includes Catherine Maxwell, Head of Strategic Acquisitions, and Daniel Foster, Chief Investment Officer. Both are directly involved in acquisition decisions with significant influence on valuation frameworks. The information provided helpful context for calibrating my engagement approach. Senior decision-makers rather than mid-level assessment team suggested serious acquisition interest rather than preliminary exploration. Their specific roles indicated focus on strategic fit and investment methodology alignment rather than purely financial metrics or operational integration considerations. I've prepared comprehensive overview of our technology investment approach, I confirmed, connecting my materials to the presentation system, including methodology differentiation, client relationship structures, and performance pattern analysis across market conditions. At precisely the appointed time, the Westridge representatives arrived, 4 professionals in conservative business attire, projecting institutional competence rather than creative disruption, despite their focus on technology sector clients. The introductions confirmed Elaine's briefing. Catherine Maxwell and Daniel Foster led the group, accompanied by senior analysts focused on operational assessment and client relationship evaluation. Thank you for accommodating our accelerated timeline, Maxwell began after preliminary pleasantries. Westridge sees significant strategic alignment potential with Meridian's specialized capabilities, particularly within technology sector verticals where your team has established distinctive positioning. The conversation began with standards: corporate acquisition dialogue, strategic synergies, complementary capabilities, expanded client service potential, before transitioning to more specific assessment of my division's investment methodology and client relationship structures. Throughout this exchange, I maintained balanced approach, providing comprehensive information while carefully managing the narrative framing to highlight distinctive aspects of our approach. Foster, Westridge's Chief Investment Officer, demonstrated particular interest in our technology sector performance metrics across variable market conditions. His questions reflected sophisticated understanding of analytical frameworks, combined with practical implementation